Marcus Tate, a black lieutenant general in the U.S. Army, was no ordinary man. At 52 years old, he had already carved his name into the annals of history, not through fame or fortune, but through decades of relentless service and sacrifice. His uniform, adorned with gleaming stars, was a testament to his years of combat and leadership in wars most people only read about in textbooks. But that evening, as he cruised through the sleepy town of Greystone, Virginia, few could have imagined the storm that was about to unfold. The town itself seemed like a quiet stop, nestled off I-95, a place where the world passed by unnoticed. But for Marcus, it was just a pit stop before an important briefing at Fort Bragg. He was just another tired traveler, his mind focused on the meeting ahead, unaware that the very act of stopping for a simple meal would ignite a series of events that would change everything. With silver hair and a chest heavy with medals, he was a man who carried the weight of countless battles. Yet that night, the weight he carried would be nothing compared to the burden he was about to bear as Marcus pulled into Ruby's diner, the neon lights buzzing above him. He had no idea that his reputation, his honor, and his very identity would soon be questioned. He didn't expect the glance of two police officers to be the spark that would ignite a firestorm. A firestorm not just about a man's service, but about the ingrained prejudices and misconceptions that have too often marred his journey. This was the beginning of a story that would challenge everything he believed about respect, authority, and identity in America. The evening had already begun to settle into a quiet calm as Marcus Tate stepped out of his rental sedan, his boots hitting the cracked pavement of Ruby's diner. The diner's neon lights flickered above him, casting a soft glow on his crisp blue uniform, the 3 stars on his shoulders gleaming faintly in the night. It had been a long 6 hours on the road, and all he wanted was a hot meal, a brief respite before the high-stakes meeting awaiting him at Fort Bragg. He walked with purpose, his gait steady and confident, his military experience evident in every step. He was a man used to commanding attention, but tonight he sought only solitude. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was warm and familiar. The smell of frying food and brewed coffee hung in the air. Truckers sat at the counter, nursing their mugs of coffee, while a family lingered at a booth, mid-meal. A waitress, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she moved, greeted Marcus with a smile. "Just passing through?" she asked, noticing his uniform. "Got a meeting down south," Marcus replied, his voice calm and practiced. He didn't seek attention, but the weight of his uniform, of his years of service, was impossible to ignore. He slid into a booth, ordered a cheeseburger, and pulled out his phone. Emails from the Pentagon flashed across the screen, followed by a message from his wife, Sheila. Just another night, he thought. Nothing unusual. Outside, the soft hum of the diner's air conditioning blended with the faint sounds of the town. But the peaceful quiet wouldn't last. Officer Dale Ramsey, standing outside the diner with his partner, Officer Travis Holt, squinted into the parking lot. They had been standing there, leaning against their cruiser, half-heartedly watching the passing cars. The moment Marcus's sedan pulled in, their attention snapped. Ramsey's eyes narrowed as he studied the sleek vehicle, the military plates visible on the back. He muttered under his breath, "Fancy ride for this dump." His partner, Holt, smirked, nodding in agreement. "That guy looks like he's playing soldier," he remarked, his tone dismissive. Neither of them bothered to check the tags or call in for verification. No, they were certain they had found a fraud. A man in a fancy military uniform in a small town like Greystone was an anomaly. They could feel it in their gut. The idea that Marcus might actually be who he said he was, an official U.S. Army general, never even crossed their minds. The officers walked toward the diner, the fluorescent lights overhead casting their shadows long and thin across the pavement. As Marcus took his time, savoring the taste of his cheeseburger, unaware of the brewing tension outside, Ramsey and Halt made their move. The bell above the diner's door jingled as Marcus stood to leave. He slid his phone into his pocket, his mind already on the road ahead. But before he could reach for his keys, a sharp voice sliced through the cool night air. "Hey, freeze!" Marcus's body went still. His instincts, honed over years of military service, immediately kicked in. His hand stopped mid-motion, freezing as he felt the cold weight of potential danger in the air. He turned slowly, his posture still as he faced the two officers now closing the distance between them. Ramsey's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding him momentarily. "Evening, officers," Marcus said, his voice calm, steady, and measured. His hands rose slowly, showing no sign of threat. He was a man accustomed to tense situations, but this felt different. This felt wrong. Ramsey stepped forward, his eyes narrowing in skepticism. "That's a hell of a costume," he sneered, his gaze fixed on Marcus's uniform. The beam of the flashlight lingered on his medals and stars as if they were mere decorations. "Mind telling me where you got it?" Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I'm Lieutenant General Marcus Tate, U.S. Army." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. Halt, circling Marcus like a shark, eyed him with an expression of mockery. "General, huh? Big shot," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Got ID for that fairy tale?" Marcus remained composed, his gaze unwavering. "Of course," he replied, reaching toward his left side, where his wallet was stored. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, to show that he wasn't a threat. But as he retrieved his military ID and offered it to Halt, Ramsey's expression turned darker. Halt snatched the wallet, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the military ID, taking in the name, rank, and photo. He handed it back to Ramsey with a shrug. "Could be fake," he muttered dismissively. The air thickened with tension. Marcus's heart rate barely quickened, but inside, a storm was beginning to churn. "You don't look like any general I know," Ramsey said, his voice dripping with contempt. The words landed like a slap to the face, heavy with racial undertones. Marcus's eyes locked with Ramsey's, unblinking. "And how many black generals have you met, officer?" he asked, his voice low but full of power. "Or is it just that I don't match the picture in your head?" The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd outside the diner began to notice the scene unfolding. A few people pulled out their phones, recording. Jenny, the waitress, stepped outside, her arms crossed, her face tight with unease. She could sense the injustice, the rising tension, but what could she do? Ramsey's face twisted, not with shame, but with rage. "Don't play smart with me," he hissed, stepping closer, his breath reeking of stale cigarettes. "We're verifying this, and if you're lying, you're done." Marcus didn't flinch. His voice remained steady. "Call Fort Bragg. Ask for Colonel Denise Warren. She'll tell you who I am." Halt let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh, we're not calling your pal for story time," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Hands on the car now." Marcus stood firm. "I'm not resisting, but I won't comply with unlawful orders. You've got no grounds to detain me." Ramsey didn't hesitate. He lunged at Marcus, grabbing his arm and twisting it violently. With a forceful shove, he slammed Marcus onto the hood of the sedan. The metal bit into Marcus's chest, but he didn't fight back. He was too calm, too steady. His wrists were shackled with cold steel, pain flaring but not breaking him. "You're under arrest," Ramsey spat, his voice full of venom. "Impersonating an officer. Resisting." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of injustice. But as the cuffs clicked shut, Marcus's voice rang out, clear and cold. "My phone's in my right pocket," he said, his tone unwavering. "Call the number labeled Pentagon. Do it now or you'll wish you had." Ramsey sneered, his grip tightening on Marcus's arm. "Save your bluff for the judge." But Marcus wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about him anymore. Marcus felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into his wrists as he was shoved roughly against the hood of the police cruiser. His chest slammed into the cold metal, a sharp pain shooting through him, but he didn't flinch. The officers, Ramsey and Halt, were stronger, fueled by their arrogance and their misguided sense of power. They were sure they had caught a fraud, sure that this was the moment they could bring down someone who didn't belong in their town, someone who didn't fit their idea of authority. Ramsey's hand was a vice around his arm as he twisted it behind his back, the cuffs digging into Marcus's skin. "You want to play tough?" Ramsey hissed into his ear, the heat of his breath mixing with the cold air. "Think you can just walk around here pretending to be something you're not?" Marcus's mind was racing, but his body remained still, his movements calculated. Every nerve in him was screaming to fight back, to break free, but he knew that would only escalate things. He wasn't a fool. He had fought battles in far more dangerous places, had faced enemies who wanted nothing more than to take him down. But he wasn't going to let these two officers control the narrative. Not today. His voice was calm, measured, despite the situation. "I'm not resisting, but I won't comply with unlawful orders. You have no right to detain me." Ramsey shoved him harder against the hood, the metal pressing into his chest, forcing the air from his lungs. "You're not in charge here, General. We are," he sneered, pushing harder, forcing Marcus's body to bend with the pressure. The smell of stale cigarette smoke mixed with the tang of night air as Ramsey's breath heated the back of his neck. "You're a fraud, and you're gonna learn what happens when you try to pull one over on the wrong people." Marcus's mind was clear, laser-focused. He wasn't going to be another statistic. He wasn't going to let them get away with this. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice a low, steady growl. "I'm a United States Army general, and I've earned every star on my chest. You can either call the Pentagon and verify my identity, or you can face the consequences of your mistake." Ramsey chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You think you can just snap your fingers and call the Pentagon? You think they'll just pick up the phone and back your story? You're nothing but a fraud playing dress-up, and we're going to make sure you pay for that." Halt stood beside them, his hands resting on his hips, his expression cold and unfeeling. "This is a mistake," he said flatly, but there was no apology in his voice. "We'll sort this out back at the station." But Marcus wasn't about to let it slide. He wasn't about to let them dismiss him like this. Not without a fight, not without making them see the truth. His identity wasn't a game, and they needed to understand that. "Call Colonel Denise Warren at Fort Bragg. She'll tell you exactly who I am." "I'll wait," Marcus said, his words firm, demanding. Ramsey sneered, clearly uninterested in Marcus's plea. "We're not calling anyone. We don't need to verify anything. You're going in the car, and that's final." At that moment, the pressure in Marcus's chest increased as Ramsey pressed harder, digging his weight into him, a taunting laugh escaping his lips. But Marcus was resolute, unmoving. His heart was steady, but there was a burning fire inside him. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the truth. about justice, about everything he had fought for in his life. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice colder than the night air. "You don't want to verify? Fine, but you'll regret this. When this is all over, you'll wish you had done the right thing." Ramsey's grip tightened. "Shut up." Marcus's eyes narrowed, unwavering. "You can do whatever you want, officer, but you'll still be wrong. You'll still be the one who made a mistake." Ramsey's face turned red with anger. The words stung, cutting deep into his fragile ego, but he wasn't about to back down. His hand went to his radio, fingers twitching with impatience. He barked into the mic. "We've got a suspect here, maybe impersonating an officer. I need backup." But Marcus wasn't paying attention to Ramsey's orders. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning. He wasn't just going to sit here and take it. He couldn't. "Call the Pentagon," Marcus said again, his voice ringing out clear and strong, cutting through the tension. "Or you'll pay for this. You'll be the one explaining yourself." It was a standoff now. Marcus stood there, cold and unmoving, knowing that this moment would change everything. The officers might not believe him now, but the truth would always win. And soon, they would learn just how wrong they were. The silence between them stretched on. The minutes dragged. The air seemed thick with everything that had been left unsaid. The simmering anger on both sides, the injustice of the situation pressing down on all of them. But Marcus wasn't worried. He had faced far worse in his life, far deadlier opponents. This was nothing. He just had to hold out, just a little longer, just long enough to prove that truth, even in the face of injustice, would always have the final word. The moment Marcus was shoved into the back of the police cruiser, everything changed. The metallic clang of the door slamming shut echoed in his mind, but there was no sense of defeat in him. No matter what these officers believed, Marcus knew that they were wrong. He had fought too many battles, faced too many foes, to let his name be tarnished by the ignorance of two small-town cops. His identity was as real as the uniform he wore, as real as the stars on his chest, earned through years of sacrifice and service. But here, in the back of that cruiser, those stars meant nothing to the men who held the keys to his freedom. Ramsey and Halt stood outside, talking amongst themselves, their voices muffled by the thick glass. Marcus's wrists burned with the tightness of the cuffs, but he was resolute. He couldn't let this stand. He wouldn't. With a slow, deliberate movement, Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up to the officer standing by the door, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Call the Pentagon," he demanded, his tone unwavering. "Call Colonel Elaine Hargrove. She'll verify who I am." Ramsey turned, his face contorting into a sneer. "You're wasting our time, General. We don't need to make any calls. You're going down for impersonation, and that's it." He slammed his fist against the side of the car, a low growl escaping his throat. But Marcus didn't flinch. "You'll regret not making that call," he said, his voice a calm, controlled storm. The silence between them stretched, each second dragging on longer than the last. The officers were clearly irritated, not knowing how to deal with a man who wasn't scared, not knowing how to deal with someone who, even in handcuffs, held the calm authority of someone who had led thousands. Ramsey muttered under his breath, his patience wearing thin. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned to Halt and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine, we'll call," he said, though his words were heavy with disdain. "But I'm telling you right now, General, you're not getting out of here." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his gaze remained unshaken. He didn't care about their threats. He didn't care about their judgment. He only needed them to understand the truth. He only needed them to see who he was and what they had done to him. Ramsey approached the police cruiser's radio, pressing the receiver to his ear, but Marcus didn't look at him. His focus remained inward, centered on the one thing that could fix this one phone call. He could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that everything could change with just one conversation. It was like everything he had worked for, every moment of pain and sacrifice, rested on this phone call. Ramsey dialed the number reluctantly, the sound of the phone ringing filling the cramped space of the cruiser. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, each second extending, the tension palpable. Marcus's heart beat steady in his chest, each thud echoing his belief that this would be the turning point. Finally, the phone picked up. "Office of the Deputy Secretary." A voice answered crisply, its tone sharp with authority. "This is Officer Ramsey with the Greystone Police Department," Ramsey said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "We've got a man claiming to be General Marcus Tate of the U.S. Army. We need you to verify his identity." Marcus's heart raced in his chest as he closed his eyes, praying the next moments would unfold the way he hoped. He had no doubt that once they spoke to Elaine Hargrove, the truth would come crashing down. But what would it cost them? The officers were already too deep in their pride and their assumptions. Would they back down, or would their egos get in the way? There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end responded. "Please hold." The line clicked, and the waiting began. Marcus didn't have to wait long. The next voice that came through was unmistakable. It was Elaine Hargrove, sharp and authoritative, a woman whose voice alone could command the room. "Marcus, where the hell are you?" she asked, her tone concerned but brimming with strength. "I'm in Greystone, Virginia," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite everything. "I need you to tell these officers who I am. I've been arrested for impersonating an officer. They won't believe my ID, and they won't listen when I tell them who I am." The silence on the other end was thick with disbelief. "What?" Elaine's voice hardened, and Marcus could feel the shift in the air. "You're telling me they arrested you?" He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yes, they're insisting I'm a fraud. They've humiliated me, detained me, and they refuse to believe I'm who I say I am." There was no hesitation in Elaine's voice when she spoke again. "Get them on the line," she demanded. "Now." Ramsey hesitated but then handed the receiver over to Marcus, his expression unreadable. Marcus held the phone to his ear, his heart pounding as he spoke directly into the device. "This is General Marcus Tate," he said, his voice unwavering. "I need you to listen to Colonel Elaine Hargrove. She'll verify everything." Elaine's voice came through loud and clear, full of authority. "This is Colonel Hargrove," she said. "I am the Deputy Secretary's office, and Marcus Tate is a United States Army general. He is who he says he is. You will release him immediately. If I don't see him free in the next 5 minutes, I will ensure your department is investigated for improper detention and unlawful arrest. Is that clear?" Ramsey and Halt exchanged nervous glances, their bravado completely shattered. Marcus could hear the quiet in the background as Elaine's words hit like a hammer. And finally, Ramsey spoke, his voice small and reluctant. "Yes, ma'am. Understood. We'll release him now." The cuffs came off, the door to the cruiser was opened, and Marcus stood, his posture still regal, his eyes piercing. As he stepped out of the car, he locked eyes with Ramsey and Halt. He didn't need to say anything. The officers already knew. They had made a massive mistake. The sound of the handcuffs clicking open reverberated in the silence of the station. As Marcus stood tall, unbowed, the officer's smug expressions faltered. He was free. Not only had he been vindicated, but he was about to become something bigger than a mere military officer. He was about to become a symbol, not just for justice, but for the fight against ignorance, prejudice, and injustice in the very heart of America. Ramsey and Halt stepped back, unsure of what to do next. Their pride, once so unshakable, was now crumbling. They had been the ones in control, the ones who assumed power over a man they thought they could break. But they had underestimated him. They had underestimated the power of truth, of standing firm against all odds. And now, they had no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. Word spread quickly throughout Greystone. The story, from the moment Marcus Tate was arrested to the monumental phone call that had saved him, became a firestorm of anger and disbelief. Locals, initially unaware of what had happened, were now in shock. The idea that two officers sworn to protect and serve could wrongfully arrest a decorated general, based solely on his race, left a bitter taste in the mouths of everyone in the town. It wasn't just Marcus who had been wronged. It was the very principle of justice that had been violated. And then the consequences began to unfold. The next morning, Greystone's police station was not the same place it had been the day before. The walls, once silent witnesses to routine arrests and mundane paperwork, were now filled with murmurs of disbelief. Ramsey and Halt sat uncomfortably in the break room, their faces pale, their pride all but shattered. The quiet, controlled hum of the office now seemed to press down on them, a reminder of how far they had fallen. At exactly 9 a.m., the phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Chief Callahan, his voice far more grave than usual. "You two report to my office. Now." Ramsey and Halt exchanged nervous glances. Neither of them said a word as they trudged into the chief's office, their steps slow and heavy. Callahan's eyes were hard as he motioned for them to sit. The tension in the room was thick. "I've just spoken to the mayor and the town council," Chief Callahan began, his voice firm but laced with disappointment. "I've been informed by the Pentagon about what happened last night. They've already begun an investigation into your actions." Ramsey opened his mouth to protest, but Callahan held up a hand. "Don't. There's no defending what you did. The whole town knows. Marcus Tate is a national hero, a man who spent decades serving his country, and you both treated him like he was nothing." Silence filled the room. Neither officer could speak. The shame, the crushing weight of their mistakes, hung in the air like a storm cloud. Chief Callahan continued, "Effective immediately, both of you are suspended. A full investigation into your conduct, specifically your discriminatory behavior, will be launched. You'll be placed on administrative leave until further notice. And make no mistake, if this investigation proves what I already know, this town will not tolerate racism or abuse of power in any form. You will face the consequences." The words hit like a hammer. For Ramsey and Halt, this was their downfall, their moment of reckoning. They had walked into that diner thinking they had all the power, thinking their authority was unchallenged. But now they were the ones on trial. Their actions had made them the villains in a story they never expected to be part of. As the officers left Chief Callahan's office, their heads hung low, a deep sense of shame weighing heavily on their shoulders. They had not only failed in their duty but had also exposed the ugly truth that lurked within them: prejudice, judgment, and a deep-seated fear of what they didn't understand. But for Marcus, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The ripple effect of the incident spread far beyond Greystone. The story of what had happened, the wrongful arrest, the humiliation, and the ultimate triumph, was shared across social media platforms. It went viral, a testament to how deeply entrenched the issues of racism and police brutality were in America. People from all over the country rallied behind Marcus. They praised his calm resolve, his unyielding belief in his identity, and his refusal to let those who tried to break him succeed. Marcus wasn't just a general. He had become a symbol of resilience and justice. The people of Greystone, once divided, now stood together. They organized protests outside the police station, demanding accountability. Signs reading "Justice for Marcus" and "See us, don't cuff us" filled the streets. The town, once quiet and oblivious, now had its eyes open. The community was finally talking about the uncomfortable truths that many had ignored for years. Jenny, the waitress from Ruby's diner, became an unexpected hero in her own right. She had stepped forward that night, speaking out when no one else would. Her courage resonated with the townspeople, and soon, she was standing on stage at town hall meetings, leading conversations about race, justice, and the need for change in Greystone. She didn't just serve food anymore. She served as a voice for the voiceless. Marcus Tate didn't seek the spotlight. He never had. But as he watched the town of Greystone transform before his eyes, he knew this was bigger than him. This was about all the people who had been silenced, all the ones who had faced prejudice and discrimination. This was about standing up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. As Marcus made his way back to Fort Bragg, the weight of the night's events still lingered. But his heart was lighter. He had proven that even in the face of injustice, the truth had the power to change everything. The consequences for the officers had come swiftly, but it was the community's response that was truly telling. They had learned that justice wasn't just about the law, it was about how we see each other, how we treat each other, and how far we're willing to go to make sure that every voice is heard. The story of Marcus Tate's wrongful arrest spread like wildfire. What had begun as a simple, yet horrifying, encounter in a small diner in Greystone, Virginia, quickly spiraled into a national conversation. It was no longer just about a man wrongfully accused of impersonating an officer. It was about something much deeper, much more pervasive. It was about race. It was about power. It was about the unchecked abuse of authority. And most importantly, it was about the people who had been forced to endure it for far too long. By the next morning, the news was everywhere. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #SeeUsDon'tCuffUs. Videos of the confrontation outside Ruby's diner, captured by bystanders who had witnessed the unjust treatment, went viral within hours. News outlets from all corners of the country picked up the story, drawing in viewers who were shocked and outraged by the blatant racism displayed by two law enforcement officers. The story resonated with people in every corner of the nation, sparking conversations about police brutality, racial profiling, and the systemic inequalities that permeated so many aspects of American society. As the news spread, the quiet town of Greystone, once largely unnoticed, found itself thrust into the spotlight. It was no longer just a dot on a map. Now it was a symbol of everything that was wrong with the justice system. And the people of Greystone were beginning to realize they could no longer stand idly by and let these injustices continue. They had to act. They had to make their voices heard. It didn't take long for protests to begin. What started as a few concerned individuals gathered outside the police station quickly grew into a massive outpouring of support for Marcus and a demand for justice. People of all ages and backgrounds came together, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," and "End racism in our police force." Their voices rose in unison, chanting for accountability, for change, for a community that could look beyond race and see each other as equals. Inside the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The officers, once so sure of their control, were now under intense scrutiny. Investigations into Ramsey and Halt's actions began immediately. What had initially seemed like an isolated incident was quickly revealed to be part of a much larger pattern of racial discrimination and abuse of power within the police department. The very fabric of the department had been tarnished by these two officers, and the public wasn't going to let them escape without consequences. The pressure mounted on the local government and the police force. Every corner of the town was being watched, every move scrutinized. No one could ignore the cries for justice that echoed through the streets. Within days, the investigation into the officers' actions turned into a full-blown probe into the culture of the Greystone Police Department. The question wasn't just about what happened to Marcus. It was about how many others had been wronged in the same way. How many other officers had let their biases determine who they chose to harass, arrest, or discriminate against. How many others had suffered in silence, their voices unheard, their pain unseen? Ramsey and Halt's names became synonymous with everything that was wrong in Greystone. The more people learned about their past actions, the more their reputation crumbled. Photos of the two officers, once seen as authority figures, now circulated online with captions condemning their actions. What had once been seen as a position of power had now become a symbol of disgrace. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As the investigation intensified, it wasn't long before the local government took action. Ramsey and Halt were officially dismissed from their positions. Their badges were stripped, their careers ruined. The town's leadership couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence of their misconduct. The community had spoken, and the government had to act. The officers' names were publicly shamed, and they were barred from ever serving in law enforcement again. But the impact of Marcus's story didn't stop there. The community of Greystone, once quiet and divided, now stood united. Their town had been forced to confront the reality of systemic racism, and they were no longer willing to turn a blind eye. The protests didn't stop with the dismissal of Ramsey and Halt. They continued, with people demanding long-term changes to how the police operated in their community. New initiatives were put in place to address bias, improve police training, and create more accountability for law enforcement officers. The town began to work together, slowly but surely, to heal the wounds that had been opened. And through it all, Marcus stood as a beacon of strength. He had never asked for this attention. He had never sought to become a symbol. But through his calm defiance, through his refusal to back down in the face of injustice, he became the catalyst for something greater. He became the embodiment of what it meant to fight for what was right, to stand tall even when the world seemed determined to push you down. For Marcus, this wasn't about fame or glory. It was about making sure no one else would have to go through what he did. It was about making sure that future generations would live in a world where justice wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. It was about the hope that one day, no one would be judged by the color of their skin or the uniform they wore. The protests may have ended, but the fight for justice was just beginning. The change that started in Greystone would ripple out, spreading across the country, urging others to ask the hard questions, to demand answers, and to never stop fighting for what is right. Marcus's story would live on, not just in the history books, but in the hearts of every person who had the courage to stand up and say, "Enough is enough." Marcus Tate returned to Fort Bragg in the days following the incident, and though he'd been through an ordeal that shook him to his core, there was no sign of defeat in his steps. When he walked through the gates of the base, the familiar sound of boots on the ground, the crisp air of military discipline, and the knowing nods from his colleagues were all there to greet him. But this time it felt different. The energy in the air wasn't just professional. It was personal. His peers, his comrades, had been watching. They had seen what happened in Greystone, and they knew what kind of man Marcus truly was. The atmosphere in the office was palpable. As he walked down the hall, Marcus felt the weight of the eyes on him, not with the tension of fear, but with respect. There were nods of acknowledgement, small waves, and some even stopped to greet him, their voices filled with gratitude and admiration. They knew his name before, but now they knew his story. They knew the strength, the courage, the unwavering resolve that it took to stand tall against injustice. "Welcome back, sir," one of the younger officers said, his voice thick with appreciation. "You did something incredible out there. We're proud of you." Marcus gave a brief nod, his trademark stoic expression on his face. He didn't need praise. He didn't need recognition. The truth had already come to light, and that was enough. But even he couldn't deny the way his heart swelled with pride, knowing that his experience had impacted the very men and women who had once looked up to him for his rank. Now, they looked to him for something more, something deeper than just military accomplishments. They saw a man who had fought not just for his country, but for the very ideals that it was founded upon. His life after Greystone, while it might have returned to some semblance of normalcy, was anything but. The ripple effect of his actions was far-reaching. Over the weeks that followed, Marcus became a voice of reason, of justice, for future generations. He began speaking at various military forums, at schools, and at community events, sharing his story of perseverance, truth, and the battle against injustice. But what truly mattered to him, what gave him purpose, was when he spoke to the younger service members, the ones still coming into their own, still figuring out who they were in the world. Fighting for what's right is never easy, he would tell them, his voice steady, a quiet strength emanating from his words. But you have to fight. You don't back down when the world tells you no. You stand firm, even when it feels like you're standing alone. The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how much they try to hide it. And when it does, it's not just about you anymore. It's about the change it can spark in others. Marcus's words weren't just rhetoric. They were the truth of his own experience. His actions in Greystone had not only shed light on the racial injustice that existed within some of the ranks of law enforcement, but also showed how one man's refusal to submit to falsehoods could begin to heal wounds that had festered for generations. Through his speeches, Marcus became more than just a military leader. He became a mentor, an example of what it meant to live with integrity, to embody honor beyond the uniform. People listened, they learned, and most importantly, they were inspired to carry the torch forward. But Marcus never let the attention or praise overwhelm him. His focus was always on the future, on the lessons that could be passed down to those who were still too young to understand the battle that had taken place. "I'm just a man," he would remind them. "Like anyone else. What matters is what you do with your time here. What matters is how you live your life." Over time, the story of what happened in Greystone began to fade from the headlines, but the impact of Marcus's courage never did. It was etched into the hearts of those who had heard his story, the ones who had witnessed his unwavering strength and his commitment to justice. His story had touched a chord not only in the military but also in the communities that had followed the events. It had inspired countless others to examine their own actions, to question the assumptions they had held for so long, and to confront the uncomfortable truths that lingered in their own lives. Marcus's fight wasn't just his fight. It became a collective effort, a fight for dignity, for respect, for equality. His story made people realize that justice could not and should not be judged by appearance or skin color. It made them see that humanity transcended everything else, that one man's voice, one man's actions, could inspire an entire community to confront the darkness and choose the light. And so, Marcus Tate continued his life at Fort Bragg, not as a man seeking glory, but as a man committed to making the world better, piece by piece, person by person. He had done it before in battlefields, and now he was doing it in the hearts of those who needed to hear his truth. His impact stretched far beyond the walls of Fort Bragg or the small town of Greystone. It reached the lives of future generations, who, through his example, would learn the true meaning of justice. In the end, Marcus Tate's story became more than just a personal victory. It became a powerful beacon of resilience, justice, and the undeniable strength of human dignity. What started as an unjust moment in a small diner in Greystone, Virginia, sparked a movement, one that transcended race, status, and background. Marcus didn't win because he fought with violence or anger. He didn't win by force. He won by standing firm in the face of adversity, by holding fast to his truth, and by embodying the values of humanity and respect that many had forgotten. As the dust settled after the events, Marcus's life took on a new role, one he had never sought but accepted with grace. He became a symbol, not of a man who overcame the odds in some grand spectacle of strength, but of the quiet power that comes with knowing your worth, knowing the truth, and refusing to let anyone strip that away. In a world where so many are left to fight unseen battles, where discrimination and prejudice often define people's existence, Marcus's story became a lifeline. For the many who have been discriminated against, rejected, or left unheard because of their race, gender, or background, Marcus Tate became an example of the power of standing up. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who has been overlooked and cast aside. Marcus's triumph was not in the public recognition, though it was undeniable. It wasn't in the legal victories or the public shaming of the officers who had wronged him, though those were important. His true victory lay in the way his story sparked conversations that many would have preferred to ignore. It made people rethink their assumptions, challenge their biases, and face uncomfortable truths. The moment he stood up in Greystone and demanded respect, not because of his rank, but because of his humanity, he set an example for the world. His story is a testament to the fact that justice is not something that can be given or taken away by mere authority or power. It's something inherent in every individual. Justice is the right to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected, regardless of the color of your skin or the uniform you wear. Marcus didn't fight for fame, but for the fundamental right of being seen as who he was, a human being with a legacy, a history, and a contribution to the world. That is a message that resonates with everyone, from soldiers to civilians, from people of all races and walks of life. And in the community of Greystone, the lessons of Marcus's story didn't fade away with the passing headlines. The protesters who once filled the streets for justice now began the hard work of rebuilding, of creating a space where the principles of equity, understanding, and kindness would flourish. Through Marcus's unwavering strength, the town had seen the cracks in the foundation of their society, and they began to repair them. They learned that the fight for justice was not just a battle for the individual. It was a collective effort to raise each other up, to challenge the norms, and to make sure that no one was ever made to feel less than human again. Marcus's story inspired thousands, perhaps even millions, to stand up for what is right, to challenge the injustices in their own lives, and to never back down when the truth was on their side. It taught them that strength isn't always about physical power. It's about the courage to speak the truth when it's easier to stay silent, the bravery to face down the uncomfortable realities that hold people back, and the wisdom to lead with compassion instead of fear. As we reflect on Marcus's journey, we find that his victory is a call to action for all of us. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to stand up when we see injustice, to lend our voices to those who are silenced, and to treat each other with the dignity and respect that every human being deserves. We can all learn from Marcus's example, and we can all strive to make our communities stronger by embracing these principles. In conclusion, Marcus Tate's story is not just one of personal triumph, but a collective victory for all who seek justice and equality. It's a story that will continue to inspire for generations to come, reminding us that no matter the battles we face, standing up for what is right, and doing so with integrity, will always make a difference. So, if Marcus's story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of standing up, of being true to who you are, and of fighting for justice in your own life, don't let it stop here. Take action. Be the change you want to see. And if you're inspired by Marcus's unwavering spirit, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Let's continue to spread these stories, to challenge the injustices in our world, and to build a future where humanity is judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Together, we can make the world a better place for all. Subscribe, join the conversation, and let's keep moving forward. Because the fight for justice is far from over, and with each story we tell, we're one step closer to a more just and compassionate world.